just about all they had to eat, but they did all right.
This DNA question about Elvis has never been answered until now. Sometime in the early 2000s, inside a quiet legal office in Memphis, a meeting took place that was never supposed to leave the room. It was a routine estate matter on the surface, the kind of paperwork that gets shuffled through law firms every day when money and legacy intersect. Signatures were needed, documents required review, and then, almost as an afterthought, someone at the table made a request that changed the temperature of the entire room. They asked for a DNA test, not a paternity suit, not a tabloid stunt, not some outsider trying to claim a piece of the Presley fortune. This was someone with legitimate standing, someone who had every reason to expect the request would be honored. Instead, the response came fast and hard. Denied, not delayed, not referred to another department, not even questioned, just denied, with a firmness that made the lawyers present exchange glances they still remember years later. The request was sealed. The conversation was never repeated in any official capacity. And for nearly 2 decades, almost no one outside that room knew it had ever happened. Until now. Because the question that was asked that day, and the reason it was shut down so quickly, has never been answered. And the deeper you dig, the more it becomes clear that this single question might reframe everything we thought we understood about Elvis Presley's bloodline. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the name Presley represents beyond the music. We're not talking about a celebrity estate. We're talking about one of the most valuable and fiercely protected legacies in entertainment history. Graceland alone draws hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. Licensing deals, merchandise, streaming royalties, film rights, the sheer weight of Elvis's cultural presence generates revenue that most corporations would envy. And all of it flows through a family tree that on paper looks simple. Elvis had one daughter, Lisa Marie. Lisa Marie had children. The line continues, except bloodlines are never as simple as the paperwork suggests. And the Presley family history is filled with fractures, silences, and chapters that don't get discussed in the official documentaries. Elvis himself carried grief in his bones from the very beginning. His twin brother, Jesse Garon, was stillborn, and Elvis reportedly talked about that loss throughout his life, wondering what might have been if his brother had survived. His relationship with his parents was intense and complicated, especially with his mother, Gladys, whose death devastated him in ways he never fully recovered from. His marriage to Priscilla, beautiful as it looked in photographs, was tangled with distance, loneliness, and pressures that eventually pulled them apart. And Lisa Marie, his only recognized child, spent her life navigating the impossible weight of being Elvis Presley's daughter, a weight that followed her until her own tragic death in 2023. When Lisa Marie passed, the public's attention returned to the Presley bloodline with renewed intensity. Suddenly, questions about inheritance, guardianship, and the future of the estate became front-page news. Her children, Elvis's grandchildren, stepped further into the spotlight, whether they wanted to or not. And beneath the surface of the legal proceedings, older questions began to resurface. Questions that had been buried, sealed, deliberately silenced. Questions about whether the family tree, as publicly understood, told the whole story. Because over the years, more than a few people have come forward claiming biological connection to Elvis. Some were obvious frauds, easily dismissed. Others had details that were harder to ignore, dates and locations, and names that lined up just enough to make investigators uncomfortable. Almost without exception, these claims were handled the same way. Quietly, firmly, with an almost allergic refusal to allow the one thing that could settle the matter forever, a simple DNA test. If the claims were baseless, science would prove it in a matter of days. If the estate had nothing to hide, testing would end the whispers permanently. So why the resistance? Why the pattern of shutting down every serious inquiry before it could reach a conclusion? The answer might lie in that sealed meeting from 2 decades ago. Because the person who asked the question wasn't a stranger looking for a payday. They were someone with standing, someone with access, someone who should have been welcomed at the table. And the speed with which they were silenced suggests that the answer, whatever it might be, frightened someone with a great deal of power. That person is still alive. They've never spoken publicly about what happened in that room. But recently, through sources close to the family, fragments of that conversation have started to surface. And what they suggest is that someone, somewhere, has spent a very long time making sure this DNA question was never answered, because the answer might have rewritten the Presley family history entirely. To understand why that sealed question carries so much weight, you have to look backward into the Presley family history and notice what's actually there. Not the polished version from the documentaries, but the real story. The one filled with gaps and silences and chapters that somehow never get examined too closely. Elvis didn't come from a simple background. His family tree stretches through Mississippi and Tennessee, through poverty and struggle, through relatives who drifted in and out of his life as fame created distance between who he was and where he came from. And woven through that history are moments where the records grow thin, where stories don't quite align, where the official narrative seems to skip over details that might complicate the legend. Start with what we know for certain. Elvis Aaron Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, on January 8, 1935. His twin brother Jesse Guerin was delivered stillborn approximately 35 minutes before Elvis arrived. That loss shaped Elvis in ways he talked about for the rest of his life. He reportedly visited his brother's grave as a child, spoke to him in quiet moments, and carried a sense of survivor's guilt that never fully faded. His bond with his mother Gladys was unusually intense. Something in Elvis broke that arguably never healed. His father Vernon was a more complicated figure. A man who spent time in prison during Elvis's childhood and whose later remarriage created tensions within the family that lingered for decades. Then came Priscilla. Their courtship began when she was just 14 years old, and he was already the most famous entertainer on the planet. They married in 1967, and Lisa Marie arrived exactly 9 months later, almost to the day. The marriage looked perfect in photographs, but behind the scenes, the distance between them grew wider each year. By 1973, they were divorced, and Elvis spent his final years increasingly isolated, surrounded by an entourage that protected him from the outside world, while arguably failing to protect him from himself. When he died in 1977, Lisa Marie was just 9 years old. She inherited everything and spent the rest of her life trying to understand who her father really was beneath the mythology. This is the official bloodline. One wife, one daughter, grandchildren who carry his genetic legacy forward. Clean and simple on paper, except it's never been quite that simple in practice. Because over the decades, multiple individuals have emerged claiming biological connection to Elvis, and not all of them were easily dismissed. Some pointed to specific time periods when Elvis was known to be romantically involved with women whose names never made it into the official biographies. Others referenced locations and dates that aligned uncomfortably well with documented gaps in his schedule. A few even produced witnesses, people willing to testify that they had seen Elvis in circumstances that suggested more than casual acquaintance. Almost universally, these claims were handled the same way. Lawyers intervened. Settlements were quietly offered in exchange for silence. And whenever the conversation turned toward DNA testing, the door slammed shut with remarkable speed. The pattern is difficult to ignore once you see it. If these claimants were simply opportunists chasing fame or money, a DNA test would expose them instantly and permanently. The estate had the resources to authorize testing, release the results, and end the speculation forever. Instead, the opposite happened. Every serious inquiry was suppressed before it could reach a laboratory. Every request for biological proof was met with legal barriers rather than scientific answers. This creates an uncomfortable question that hangs over the entire Presley legacy. What exactly is being protected? If the bloodline is complete and accurate as publicly stated, transparency would only strengthen the family's position. If there are no hidden children, no secret branches, no ghosts in the genealogy, then DNA would confirm it beyond any doubt. The resistance to testing suggests the opposite. It suggests that somewhere in the silence, in the sealed documents and the quiet settlements, there exists a truth that someone powerful has worked very hard to keep buried. And the person who asked that question 2 decades ago, the one who was shut down so firmly, may have gotten closer to that truth than anyone before or since. For decades, the wall held. Every inquiry deflected, every claim quietly neutralized, every attempt to introduce DNA evidence into the conversation blocked before it could gain traction. The Presley estate maintained its position with remarkable consistency, and the bloodline question remained officially unanswered. But walls don't hold forever. And sometime in the past several years, according to sources who have only recently begun to speak, a test actually happened. Not through official channels, not with a state authorization, not in any laboratory that would produce legally admissible results. This was something else entirely. Quiet, unofficial, conducted far from Memphis and even further from public scrutiny. And the people who saw the results have carried that knowledge in silence until fragments of the story finally began to surface. The circumstances surrounding this test remain deliberately vague, and for good reason. The individuals involved understood that going public could expose them to legal consequences, professional ruin, and the full weight of an estate with virtually unlimited resources to protect its interests. What can be pieced together is this. Biological material connected to the Presley lineage was obtained through means that exist in a legal gray zone. A private laboratory conducted analysis without knowing the full significance of what they were examining. And when the results came back, they didn't match expectations in ways that created immediate discomfort among those who had arranged the testing. To be clear, this wasn't definitive proof of a hidden child or a secret sibling. The science doesn't work that cleanly when the chain of custody is questionable and the reference samples are limited. What the test reportedly revealed was something more subtle, but arguably more unsettling. A genetic marker, an anomaly in the data, a result that didn't align with the official family tree in the way it should have, if that tree were complete and accurate. The possible explanations range from mundane to explosive. Laboratory contamination could account for unexpected results. Misidentification of samples remains a possibility that can't be entirely ruled out. But those who saw the data firsthand reportedly didn't believe the discrepancy was an error. They believed it was a clue. The reactions inside the circle varied dramatically. Some dismissed the findings outright, arguing that unofficial testing conducted under questionable circumstances proved nothing and risked damaging the family's reputation if it ever became public. Others grew deeply uncomfortable, recognizing that even flawed evidence could open doors that had been sealed for decades. At least one person, according to sources close to the situation, began quietly investigating on their own. Not to expose anyone or chase headlines, but simply to understand what the results might mean. Because if there's something incomplete about the Presley bloodline as publicly understood, the implications extend far beyond historical curiosity. They touch inheritance. They touch legacy. They touch the fundamental question of who has the right to claim connection to Elvis Presley's name. The emotional weight of this situation is difficult to overstate. For the family members currently navigating the aftermath of Lisa Marie's death, the idea that additional claimants might emerge with genetic ammunition represents a genuine threat to their stability and their futures. For the claimants themselves, some of whom have spent decades being dismissed as fantasists or fraudsters, the existence of any DNA evidence that supports their position feels like long-delayed vindication. And for fans who have followed the Presley story across generations, the possibility that Elvis's bloodline branches in ways we never knew adds another layer to an already complicated legacy. What makes this moment different from all the speculation that came before is simple. Someone finally has leverage. The person who asked that original question 2 decades ago, the one who was shut down so firmly in that Memphis legal office, has reportedly resurfaced through back channels. They're not making public accusations or granting interviews. They're communicating through lawyers, through intermediaries, through the kind of careful maneuvering that suggests they understand exactly how dangerous this territory is. But they're not going away. Because the unofficial test, whatever its limitations, has given them something they never had before, a reason to keep pushing. And the estate, for perhaps the first time in its history, may not have enough silence left to make this question disappear. Step back from the investigation for a moment and sit with a question that might matter more than any DNA result ever could. Why do we care so deeply about this? Why does the possibility of hidden Presley descendants stir something in millions of people who never met Elvis, never shook his hand, never heard him sing in person? The answer reveals something profound about what Elvis represents and why his bloodline carries weight that transcends celebrity gossip. When someone like Elvis Presley dies, they don't really disappear. Their voice survives on recordings. Their image persists in photographs and films. Their home becomes a museum where strangers walk through rooms that once held private moments. But all of that is preservation, not continuation. It's memory frozen in amber, beautiful but static. Blood is different. Blood means that something of Elvis continues to move through the world in living, breathing form. It means his genetic code, the biological instructions that shaped his voice and his face, and whatever ineffable quality made him Elvis, didn't end in 1970. It branched forward into the future, carried by children and grandchildren, and perhaps, if the questions are answered, by people we don't even know about yet. This is why the DNA question matters so intensely. It's not about inheritance money or estate battles or legal claims, although those elements certainly exist. At its core, the question touches something almost spiritual. We want Elvis to continue. We want proof that death didn't fully claim him, that some essence of who he was persists beyond records and memorabilia. The possibility of hidden descendants offers that proof in the most tangible form imaginable. It transforms Elvis from a historical figure into an ongoing presence, a bloodline still unfolding, a story without a final page. Consider what it would mean if the DNA question were definitively answered in either direction. If testing confirmed that the official family tree is complete and accurate, that every biological connection to Elvis has already been documented, it would close a door that has stood open for decades. The family could move forward without the shadow of doubt, without the constant threat of new claimants emerging with genetic evidence. There would be grief in that closure, the same grief that comes with any ending, but there would also be peace. The speculation would finally have nowhere left to go. But if the answer points in the other direction, if hidden descendants exist, if the Presley bloodline branches in ways that were deliberately concealed, then everything shifts. Elvis's personal story transforms from tragedy into something even more complex. The loneliness he expressed so often in interviews and lyrics takes on new dimensions. Was he separated from children he knew about? Did he make choices, or were choices made for him? The questions multiply faster than they can be answered, and the people caught in the middle, the claimants who might finally be validated, the family members whose legitimacy might be questioned, all of them face consequences that reshape their lives. The human cost of this situation deserves acknowledgement regardless of where the truth lands. Claimants who have spent years being mocked and dismissed carry real scars from that experience. Family members who have had to defend their connection to Elvis against constant whispers carry burdens that outsiders rarely appreciate. Even the fans, the millions of people who have invested emotional energy into this mystery, experience something genuine when the question resurfaces. Hope and anxiety, and the particular ache of loving someone you can never fully know. Perhaps the full answer will never become public. The legal stakes are enormous, the financial implications staggering, and the emotional damage of a definitive revelation might be more than anyone involved is willing to risk. But the question itself, the fact that it keeps being asked across decades, tells us something important. We're not ready to let Elvis go. We're not satisfied with the ending we were given. We keep searching for continuation, for connection, for proof that the story isn't over. And maybe that's the most honest answer available. Elvis Presley, in the ways that truly matter, continues. Not just in his music or his movies or the mansion that bears his name, but in the longing of everyone who still wonders whether somewhere out there, a piece of him walks through the world carrying his blood, his legacy, and perhaps even his eyes. If you've made it this far, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the DNA question deserves a definitive answer, or are some secrets worth protecting? Share your perspective in the comments below, and if you want more untold stories about the legends who shaped music history, subscribe now. More is coming soon.